Hey guys, this is RolloutReviews with RolloutReviews, bringing you another Bionicle review. This time it is set number 8572, Tahu Nuva. This set was released in 2002 and contains 36 pieces. After having just imprisoned the Bulrock Queens, who controlled swarms that terrorized the island, the Toa stood in the center of the cavern, feeling victorious. Then the ground began to shake. Each of them readied themselves for a new threat, but soon the ground itself slipped from beneath them, and all 6 Toa were tossed into a large vat of energized protodermis. It changed them. Their armor, their abilities, their weapons, and their masks of power were all transformed. When they emerged from the depths, they were something more than just mere Toa. They were Toa Nuva. Tahu Nuva is fundamentally very similar to its predecessor in many ways. However, obviously there are some key new elements in play, namely the legs here. These are new pieces, these Nuva armor leg pieces here, and unfortunately, I think the original legs look a little bit better. I just like the style of this old limb piece used on his upper arm instead of his leg this time around a bit better. I don't know, you can see the joint, you can see the pistons that would provide some kind of bend there, whereas this just sort of has a gap and maybe an implied hinge, but overall sort of just looks like a bent piece of metal. That's not to say this doesn't look cool. I really like the design of this, I just like the old one a bit more. The torso is the exact same part here, but is adorned with some new Nuva armor. This conforms to the body pretty well and attaches in the same way that the ball accent attached to the chest of the old Tahu. I really like the way it fits on there, very snug, and it's a very sleek looking piece of armor. Similarly, he has these Nuva shoulder armor bits. It's in a very similar style. His shoulders are attached in the sideways orientation rather than the downward orientation that Liwa and Kopaka had before. In fact, all of the Toa Nuva shoulders are attached in this way to support this new piece of armor. It's very cool looking and very useful in mocking. Now, of course, his arms are symmetrical this time around. They're also the old leg part that I mentioned earlier. However, he has some proper hands on both of his arms. Interestingly enough, though, they're molded in red rather than the black connectors all across the rest of the figure. Like I said, interesting choice. Now, instead of his single fire blade, he has these Magma Swords. He wields 2 of them, and they're a very cool design. They have a similar tribal flame aesthetic towards the back as his original flame sword. However, there's this sort of futuristic, industrial-looking blade towards the front. As much as I like the original Tahu's sword, honestly, I think these look a lot cooler. Tahu now wears the Great Kanohi Hau Nuva, a slight upgrade from his original mask. This allows its user to create even stronger force fields for themselves and allies. It also allows allies to borrow this power as long as they are also wearing a Kanohi Nuva of sorts. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of this mask. It looks very strange and honestly not a whole lot like the original Hau. Aside from maybe the eye shapes and that central mouthpiece, it's not very similar at all. A very different shape, a much larger mask, overly complex, and strangely organic. Not really sure what they were going for with this. This attaches to the underlying head in a very similar way as before. In fact, the head is the exact same part. I suppose it looks okay once it's on Tahu, but overall I think the original Hau has a much stronger design. Tahu Nuva's gear function has a slight bit more ingenuity than the original. You'll notice there's another gear here towards the bottom that locks the whole function in place. This means this arm here can't move aside from the ball joint towards the bottom. This arm here, in this orientation, is attached via a black pin axle, meaning it can freely move here. It's also not a gray pin axle, meaning it can actually hold a pose, unlike the original Liwa. Now, if you do want to move this arm here at the shoulder, all you need to do is slide this gear in like that on the axle it's attached to. Bring it up, and then slide it back into place once you have it in the position you want it. This allows a lot more options in terms of posing without that gear function flopping around. Of course, if you do want to activate the gear function entirely, you can disengage this completely and swing this arm up and down via the gear on his back. However, it goes even further than that, because obviously Tahu Nuva has two blades. Maybe you want to give him a double gear function. Well, to do that, all you need to do is pull out the pin axle here, pull off this gear, and put it in that gap there. Take this axle here, put it in the place of the pin axle, and put the extra piece there at the back. Reattach the arm, and all of a sudden, Tahu can now swing both of his swords. If that's not good enough for you as far as play features go, each of the Toa Nuva have something called dual weapon functionality, meaning they can not only use their tools for offensive and defensive purposes, but also as a mode of transportation. In Tahu's case, in a lot of the promotional works, he wielded his weapons like this, a dual-bladed Magma Sword. From there, it creates kind of a distinct shape. You can take this and attach these to one of his feet, of course, then turning it into kind of a lava board that he can use to surf the fiery tides of Tawahi. Last but not least, I'm going to show you something here that is by no means in the instructions. It's just something pretty cool that I found you can do. Basically, I found ways for all of the Toa Nuva to store their weapons on their person without any extraneous pieces. You can't always expect a Toa to have their weapons in hand, so it's nice to store them somewhere. In Tahu's case, you're going to slide these gears temporarily off of his back. Then you're going to take the fourth slot down on each of his swords and slide that over the bottom axle, one going one way and the other going the other way. Then you can replace the gears. It does look a little bit unwieldy just due to the nature of Tahu's swords. They're very broad weapons, and it might look a little bit silly from the front. But I've always seen Tahu as somebody who might parade his weapons all around even when he doesn't need them, so maybe he doesn't do this very often. Overall, I still prefer the original Tahu aesthetically, despite all of the Nuva's perks. But that's not to say that this is a bad set. In fact, as a set, it's a big improvement over its predecessor. You just have a lot more options and a lot more play features. Unfortunately, a lot of his design aspects just don't do a whole lot for me. While I really love his sword design, by comparison, I'm not a huge fan of everything else. So that is about it, guys, and this is IX Roll at IX, signing off.